we got airborne and the cooling turbine froze up.
Oh.
Cockpit got really, really hot.
Oh, man.
And so we turned right around and came back in and landed. And they had one runway shut down and another one they were working on. We landed over the top of some equipment even, and we're landing towards town. We got stopped okay and taxied back up by ops, got out, and the crash alarm went off. I thought, well, Blake didn't declare an emergency, and we're safe. Well, one of the test center airplanes had taken off and went squirrely right after takeoff and crashed right on one runway. By the time I got into the Guard, I'd been out 3 years, and I lost several years' time and grade and started over at day one as a buck sergeant again.
Oh, okay. Back when they had buck sergeants.
And that's where that nickname came from.
I was going to say, I should have asked that before.
His grin couldn't have got any wider.
Mm-hmm.
On his 90th birthday, he's flying a B-17. You know?
That is cool.
Yeah. I don't know what our altitude was. I was kind of looking at the engine instruments. We were pretty low.
Yeah, well, good on you. That's all I have to say. Hello, this is Jimbo from the YouTube channel Jimbo, South Dakota, and this is the Hog House Chronicles podcast. And today, got a friend from the Guard. He's got quite a few layers of the onion to go through today. It's going to be pretty interesting. Robert Buck Lien. I had to think of what his first name was because it's always been Buck to me and most everybody out there. But yeah, he's got a lot of experience, and he agreed to come here and do this. He's one of the first ones that I asked. He's been thinking about it for a while, and he just thought now was the time. So I wanted to welcome Buck, and we're just going to go ahead and start with whatever you want to say, where you grew up, how you grew up, and just kind of ease your way into how you got into the military, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, actually, I was born in Los Angeles, California.
Really?
So when my dad came home from World War II, him and Mom got married and moved out there. And we were out there, I guess I was probably 3 when they moved back. Dad decided he wanted to come back to the farm. Mm-hmm. So we ended up on the farm southwest of Irene, about 7 miles. And by moving there, I got to go to a one-room country school for 3 years where I was tops in my class. Because I was the only one in my class.
How many total were in that room with you?
I think they were 6, and when it got down to 5, that was when they closed it the last year. Mm. So, and then it was off to the big school in Irene. So I was actually pretty well ahead of myself at that point. That didn't last long, but when you go to a one-room country school, you're hearing what's going on with the other classes. Mm-hmm. So you get a lot more than just what's for your grade, you know. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, my wife was a part of that down by Springfield as well, and she remembers the one-room classroom. And I grew up in Elk Point, and it was, I think, the early 70s where all the country schools down there came into town as well. So there's people that we know that have still experienced that. It's pretty cool, actually.
Well, it was, looking back on it, it was kind of fun. I was about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from school, and in good weather, I'd be hoofing it, But I did have one of the guys that lived down the road from me had a pony, and if I got at the end of my driveway quick enough, I could get a ride with him sometimes.
There you go.
So I didn't have to walk all the time. But so I went on to finish grade school in Irene and graduated high school there. Mm-hmm. So played some sports. Some I was better at than others, but one of the advantages of going to a smaller school, you get the opportunity to do some of that stuff.
Right, and a wide range of it as well, not specializing. They needed everybody.
Yeah, we really did.
To make the teams. Mm-hmm.
So from there, one day a buddy of mine and I skipped school on a spring day and came to Sioux Falls and joined the Air Force. We were both 18 and we'd taken the Armed Forces qualification test, and back at that point in time, I was 18 and a half when I graduated high school by virtue of my birthday. Well, with Vietnam going the way it was, if you weren't in college at 19, you were going somewhere. So we'd both decided that we wanted to go in the Air Force, and my dad had been in the Army Air Corps, and so he always was pushing the Air Force too. But it was one of those things. I came home from school, and Mom said, "Well, what'd you do today?" I said, "Well, I skipped school and joined the Air Force." And you what?
Had she had any inkling of you doing that before that moment?
Well, it had been talked about. I talked about all the services, and my grandpa was combat wounded in World War I, and he was very much against me going into the Marine Corps or any Army-related ground forces.
Right.
So
very understandable.
Yeah. So that's where I got my start going into the Air Force.
So when you went into the Air Force, did you go to your training and stuff and then head like straight to Vietnam from there, or did you serve over here for a while first?
Well,
How did that go?
At that point in time, the Air Force only had 4 weeks of basic training because the big push was getting through. And tech school was 3 shifts, 6 days a week. And so I went to basic at Lackland and then went to Shepherd for 1 and 2 engine jet fighters.
Okay, I was going to ask you what the career field was.
Yeah. Virtually everybody that signed up for mechanical back in those days were being pushed into some brand aircraft maintenance. Except my buddy that I joined with, he had a little bit higher electronic scores, and they put him in electronics power production. So he wasn't very happy about that. But you go where you go. So
did you enlist like with the buddy program or anything like
Well,
that, or you two were just both there?
We joined together, and the recruiter told us we would at least be going to basic together, which they tell you a lot of things, but we did go. We were in the same flight.
Okay,
Basic.
so he didn't lie to you anyway, and he was a little more realistic.
And we
than
did
some
both
others.
go to Shepherd, although I was in a different squadron than my buddy, and mine was a little shorter school. I ended up going to McConnell Air Force Base on F-105s.
Okay.
And I didn't even know what one looked like because we didn't have one of those in tech school. So
a little OJT there. Huh?
Well, it was actually, I got started out scraping paint on ground power equipment. I didn't know how this 4 years was going to go because they needed one person out of the 6 of us that were checking in to go scrape paint, and guess who they pointed to? Me. So
Oh man.
so I ended up going to that for a couple of weeks, and then went to F-105 FTD in the mornings, and then had flight line training in the afternoon. But I didn't really have the best trainer either. He was a good guy, but he'd been in 4 years in the Air Force. Rank was terrible back in the early 60s. And he got out as an Airman Second, the 2-striper, what they called there. And he had to take a stripe off to come back in again. So he had just gotten his second stripe back when he was my trainer, if you will. So so I had that PCS. I got to McConnell, the middle of October, and went through FTD school. Went on one TDY to George Air Force Base because we were bringing pilots through that were qualified on other fighters, but going on the 105 to go to Takli or Korat, Thailand.
Oh, because that was way out west in California?
Yeah,
George?
out in the high desert, Victorville, California.
Okay.
And that's where we went out and did our live drops and aero gunnery and got them tuned in on that. But I was pretty excited about getting to go to California because I was born out there, Well, we're going to leave, and the guy I worked for got sick, got dropped off the trip, and we were so short on people. I was still a 3 level, but I ended up with an airplane for 3 weeks out in crewed an airplane.
Did that make you nervous, or were you like, I got this?
Well, the worst part about it was most of the time we were out in a live load area, so you weren't close to you couldn't go next door and ask a question either.
Sure.
And I think I did write my memoirs later on in one of my hobbies, but I said, I don't know who was more scared, this 19-year-old kid launching this airplane or the pilot that was coming out to fly it. But survived that, got back to McConnell, and I was going to a driver's training class, and they called up and said, you got orders coming, and if you want any leave at all, you better out-process and go home. So I'd only been there not even 6 months, and I'm off on my second PCS with orders to follow. So I go home, and no orders. I'm home almost a month, and I still no orders. And during Vietnam, there were cases of guys doing that, and they're never getting their orders, and then just showing up when their enlistment was up to get out. But,
Really? Oh my word! Good tracking process there, huh?
It was. So I called back down to my squadron, and I talked to a guy I knew in the orderly room, and he said, "Oh yeah, your orders are coming." So they came about a week later. So I was home almost 5 weeks. So in the first year, 11 months of service, I had 2 weeks after tech school, and then 5 weeks. I used up a couple of years leave within the first 11 months.
Right.
And, of course, I was out of money by then, too. But in those days, you traveled with your pay records. And Sioux City Air Base, the airplanes were gone, but they still had a finance, and they had a clinic, a couple of, down there. And my dad was going to Sioux City. One day I said, I think I'm going to go along down there and check that out. And I went out there, and, I went to finance with my pay records, got paid. And I needed one more shot. They said, if you can get it before you get in that long airplane ride, you need a Gamo-Gobelin shot, which you got in your posterior.
I remember hearing that term before, not really knowing what it was.
Well, it was supposed to be the cure-all for anything you'd catch over in that end of the world.
Oh, man. The only impression I got, it was a pretty nasty shot.
It was, because I was able to get it at the clinic in Sioux City, because I had my shot records with me, too. So we get home, and Dad was still plowing in those days. He said, why don't you go out and make a couple rounds? I made one round, and I got off that tractor. I said, that is enough of that bouncing around on that.
Yeah. I mean, the soreness of the shot, but also were you feeling terrible?
The volume of the shot. I mean, it was like a softball size, seemed like. But,
right. Oh, my word. Thick as syrup, probably, too. Man.
So I finally got my orders. And took off from the old terminal, which is like where the motor pool is now out at the Air Guard. But I remember looking out the window, seeing the 102s down there line. I didn't know anything about the Air Guard in Sioux Falls. It's like, I wonder what they're doing here,
Yeah. That's pretty common. There's actually a lot of people that don't know about the
I knew a lot
guards
about the Army Guard because I knew some guys had gone into that. And I wouldn't have probably gone in the Guard anyway, because one of the reasons I wanted to enlist and get off the farm was we milked cows.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to get away from that. And I think about 6 months after I left, so did the cows too. So
tells you how important you were around there for labor.
It was, I was the only boy in the family, so that was morning and night. But so anyway, finally got on an airplane, and they were holding the airplane for one passenger to come in from someplace over Minnesota, and it was a guy that I'd been stationed with down in McConnell, was also going to my same base.
Okay.
So we got to go all the way over together. We went to Travis, went to San Francisco, and then up to Travis. And we checked in there, and they said, well, we got too many people scheduled, so anybody with 1 or 2 stripes is not going for another week. So all this scheduling for me to get going is just, it hasn't been real.
Right.
Right on. So we laid around for a week out there before we got on the airplane to go overseas. So.
And then when you were leaving, you were going straight over to Vietnam?
Well, we went on a commercial charter, and we stopped in Hawaii, we stopped in Clark in the Philippines, stopped in Tan Son Nhut in Vietnam, and then on into Bangkok. I think it was, the whole ordeal took about 20 hours by the time we got over there.
So what was going through your head as far as you knew you were going to go to Vietnam, you're getting closer, you have the delays, you have time to think about this, but you're going to an air base as opposed to, being like artillery or infantry type stuff. What was going through your mind as far as having to go to Vietnam?
Well, I wasn't concerned about that because in the Air Force, you're pretty well protected when you're around those high-value assets anyway. But I was ready to go.
Yeah.
And I got over to karate. I wasn't out of high school a year yet, so and I had 2 PCSs in my first year in the Air Force. So. And then I got over there, and I'd been a crew chief in the States. Well, over there, they put me in repair reclamation in field maintenance, which completely different job. you know, so it's just about like starting over again.
So you're just learning from the guys that were there?
Well,
OJT?
yeah, the first job I went on was helping pull a horizontal stabilizer off an airplane, and the one end was shot off. So it's kind of realization that,
Yeah.
you know.
Wow, that's quite a task to be your first task.
Yeah, that was the first. We ended up dropping it on the ground, but it didn't hurt anything because one end was shot off anyway. So.
Right. Yeah. Don't drop the new one, right?
Yeah, that's right. So it was a real learning curve to going into something completely different again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I would have rather been a crew chief, but you know, we lost a lot of airplanes over there, and I thought later, well, I wouldn't really want to have been the last one to strap somebody in that didn't come back.
Right. Mm-hmm. I've heard that before.
So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So what base did you go to? Where
I was at
that?
Karat.
Oh, Karat was the base.
Yeah,
Okay,
there were
I
like
missed
7
that.
bases over there. There was, I forget how many thousand troops were in Thailand. I mean, it was, but Karat and Tak Lee had the F-105s.
Okay.
We had 4 squadrons, and then that went down to 3. They absorbed into the 3rd squadron, and I figured up at one time that from our base we lost 56 airplanes the year I was there
Wow.
because
That's
they
a lot.
were flying into the hot spots in Hanoi, Haiphong, and
Yeah. Was that like 18 to 24 jets per squadron?
depending
then,
on how
or-
many were. Yeah, I think
How many you still
we had 99 revetments.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they were all full, sometimes not.
Right.
And there were always airplanes coming in from the States,
Uh-huh.
replacements.
Wow. You can just imagine the manufacturing it took to keep that going as well. You know, you hear the stuff about World War II and Rosie
Yeah.
the Rivers and all that.
They lost enough during that time frame. Tak Lee lost a similar number. When I went over there were Seymour Johnson had some 105s. Nellis did one other base. When I came back, McConnell was the only one that had 105s.
Mm-hmm.
The attrition had been such.
Right. Wow. Highly used. I can't picture what the 105 looks like. I'm going to have to look that up after
It
this.
was the biggest single engine fighter they ever made.
Really?
Yeah.
And was that designed for dogfighting mostly, or was that a GP unit where they could drop some bombs? as
Actually, it was designed for a nuclear weapon.
well? Oh, hence the size.
Yeah, and it was a Mach 2 airplane, too. I mean, it was big and had a bomb bay, which had a 390-gallon fuel tank in it because we weren't dropping any nukes.
Mm-hmm.
And then they carried a MRAC that hung on the bomb bay doors.
Mm-hmm.
And the normal load was like 6 750s on there, which once in a while they'd get a little exuberant trying to get away from the bad guys or beating the airplane up on their 100 mission flyover, and they could tear out those bomb bay doors, rip them. And that was one of our jobs, that we replaced those things.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, with being in R&R shop, what was the range of maintenance you would do on the aircraft?
Oh, we changed a lot of center windshields. If they left the rain removal on too long, they'd crack them, which is kind of a tough job. We overhauled some wing flap mechanical actuators, rig flight controls. Even we rigged the air refueling system too. Just you name it.
I was going to say, sounds like kind of jack of all trades. Like this.
It was
is
everything above the
yours.
crew chief level. You know, those guys didn't have time to be doing what we were doing either.
Right.
You know? So
And you had separate engine shop that would work on those.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, we had all the field maintenance, normal field maintenance functions. That's just what we were involved in. We had 2 sections in the R&R shop. The one I was in, we did the maintenance on the airplanes, and the other shop or other group just strictly sat out on a bunch of crash equipment, big ukes and anything that they would need to move a disabled airplane off the runway.
right. So you were doing tires and all that kind of stuff.
Now, we had a tire shop. We had one guy that honchoed 3 or 4 ties in there. They were busting tires. So
Okay.
I never had to do any of that. So
So they brought ties in to help with that kind of
ties,
stuff.
some of them were actually Thai Air Force types that were doing this moonlighting, if you will.
Oh.
And they also build they were building up drop tanks. They were working in that area because anytime they got in trouble up north, the drop tanks were the first things to go.
Right. Get rid of that weight.
Yep. Weight and drag. And so some of them guys worked in that area too.
Sounds like a lot of knowledge. And my guess is, you're more than familiar with the technical orders, but my guess is you probably had limited literature to refer to.
We had all the tech data, but unfortunately, the way things were going, a lot of guys just went through the FTD, and they were coming off all the other different airplanes because they were using up, they could only send you on a remote tour every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So guys that worked on, one of my best buddies was a T-39 guy before he went over there. So not everybody had actually worked on one. So, and sometimes you'd go out on a work order and, you just take your tech order out there and sit there and scratch your head because you hadn't done it or nobody else on your particular group had done it. So
right. Did you have a lot of pressure from above?
Oh yeah.
Trying to, again, figure.
Oh yeah.
You're under the pressure, under the gun.
Yeah, they're wanting to plug it into another bombing mission.
Mm-hmm.
What's your E-Tech on that?
Wow. How do you answer that?
The thing that I didn't like, and it only happened to me once or twice, but if you're sitting around the shop and they call the red ball for a pilot's having trouble with this or that, and you go out there and that guy's been, by the time he's briefing and he's been prepping for that mission for a long time, and he's sitting out there sweltering,
mm-hmm.
and it had kind of a two-way air refueling system on the 105, and sometimes they'd get screwed up and they weren't operating it right. But, here you get this guy's been sitting there, and you got some two-striper kid crawling up on the ladder supposed to fix this for you.
Right.
Most of the time they just weren't operating it right, but
yeah,
I didn't like that.
No, that's a lot of pressure. And with, some of the Vietnam guys that I've interviewed, they were more the Army side of the house and stuff. And there's different pressures and stories with that, but I can definitely relate with what you're talking about there because there's a lot at stake. A lot of the ground guys are dependent on these dudes to get in the air.
And you're operating in it was a pretty mild, you flew around the clock and
mm-hmm.
the noise is always there. It's...
Were you in hard billets at all, or was it all tent living?
Lived in an 8-man hooch,
mm-hmm.
corrugated tin roof and screen sides.
Yep. Yeah, because the one thing you didn't mention that some people do, and I've been reading a lot on the Vietnam folks. There's a certain book that's out that I've interviewed like 4 or 5 people from there. But almost every single one of the stories talks about, when they first walked off the plane in country, the climate hitting them. And you didn't make any mention of that. You just kind of like, it's all relative, I suppose. But.
Actually, I spent 2 days in Bangkok waiting to get a ride up country to Karat.
Mm-hmm.
And the old saying, you're not in Kansas anymore.
Yep. So you did have that realization.
Intense heat and smell, open air fish markets.
mm-hmm.
It's the Venice of the Orient, they call it, but that's because those canals are also sewage disposal.
Right.
So the combination of all the vehicles, blue smoke and haze and smell of walking through one of them fish markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's something that surprised you the most, either on base or off base, anywhere through your career, as far as being overseas? Is there anything that really surprised you?
No, that really was my introduction to that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, the smell, I've told people, when I was over in different countries over there, is that, here we have the freezing cold winters that a lot of people hate, but that breaks down all the, the animals that might be laying in the ditch, roadkill, what have you. Winter gives that opportunity to really break down that. But I just remember walking through the market in Singapore and seeing the face of a hog hanging with a hook through the nose, and it was like, that's mine. That's the most surprising thing.
I remember plucked chickens hanging with a coat hanger wire through their eyes, hanging up like that.
Oh, yeah.
And snakes and any other kind of meat they thought was good to eat, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and if you're in maybe what I would call a little bit more of a survival mode than what we are over here, of course, but and it's just the cultures as well. You'll eat more things or different things than what we would find appetizing,
Yeah.
but no matter what's hanging there, if it's got flies all over it and stuff,
yeah.
it makes you think twice.
Yeah, I'm thinking this is probably going to be a long year.
Yeah.
Not that the chow hall was all that good either once we got to the base, but
Did you have to eat like MREs or C rations very
No.
often, or
no, we had a regular chow hall.
Yeah,
Of course, you had recombined milk.
recombined?
Oh, it was terrible tasting.
I've never heard that term
Yeah,
before.
it was powdered whatever. So I never cared much for that.
And you had access to the best milk around your whole time
Yeah.
growing up, and then
Yeah.
you get thrown into that.
It wasn't too bad. We'd go downtown once in a while. There was a couple restaurants that were approved supposedly by the base. Go down and have some water buffalo steak or a fried rice, or something.
Was it advertised as water buffalo steak, or was it mystery meat? You just
No,
really
they-
weren't
they-
sure.
Well, that's what they were advertising it as. It was actually pretty good.
Yeah, because I have the feeling that when we were in Belgium, we talked about that just a little bit ago, but I think we ate a lot of horse over there. But
That could be.
none of it was written in English
Yeah,
anyway, so we just kind of pointed, or if somebody's eating something over there, like, I'll have some of that. But yeah, you can survive on a lot of stuff, a lot of different kinds. It's not that big a deal.
Trying to order in a foreign country is a little bit of a challenge sometimes, but one of my later trips, coming back from Saudi Arabia, we had a couple of days in Spain, and we were going to go downtown to a restaurant to eat. And somebody recommended this place to go, and we had a van full of guys, and the streets are getting narrower and narrower, and we're getting down to, okay, there's the place. So we stopped, and the waiter didn't speak any English. We didn't speak any Spanish. And he was getting kind of perturbed with us after a while. Finally, he picked up the menu and he goes, pointed to moo, bah, oink, oink.
There you go, smart guy.
Yeah, so you knew what the entree was anyway. So.
Yep. That's clever. Probably wasn't his first time having to do that.
I don't think so, but I mean, he was just kind of getting upset with us, and he finally decided, I'm going to take care of this.
Right. Did you need, while you're in Vietnam, did you need special permissions like each day to go off base and go down, or did they just tell you which places to stay away from, ones you could
Well,
go?
there were some places that were off limits, supposedly.
But just to leave base,
You had a
weren't,
Class A pass,
questioned.
really.
Okay.
While I was there, yeah. I'd heard later on they might have done some curfew stuff, but, we were 24-hour-a-day operations, so the guys that worked at night maybe go down during the day, or guys during the day would go down at night. And
Well, and you spent plenty of time amongst the general populace. What was your thoughts there? What did you notice things, or is it just like downtown here? Or?
One of the things about living in those hooches, we had a house girl, and the one we had was probably in her 30s, and she was kind of the honcho of a bunch of the other ones around, and she was a real sweetheart, and she would counsel us on things we shouldn't be going downtown. And she says, go downtown and check Susie Wong's my D, which means bad,
Yeah.
or she'd always talk about if she could tell you'd been out drinking or something, she'd be shaking her head at you.
Right.
She washed all her clothes, ironed them on the wooden floor of the hooch, and there were no drinking fountains or anything. We had whiskey bottle. We had a refrigerator, and she'd fill our whiskey bottles with water, so that was our water supply there. And when we left, there were 5 of us that moved into that hooch at the same time, and she cried and cried. And I don't know if she was going to miss us, or the fact she had to break in 5 new guys.
I'd say she probably missed you guys. I bet they get attached to the people. I mean, It sounds like she's a person of service. It sounds like anyway, and they
she was
really
married
care
to a
about
Thai
people.
master sergeant too, so she was real familiar with the military. But so we chipped in, and we bought her. We had to send off to Japan to a BX to get her a real ironing board, bought a real ironing board and and a new iron, and then she cried and cried when she got
that's cool.
when she got that, and she gave all of us a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave me the ugly green tie. I thought I got a tie from a tie. I got that hanging up. I got a wooden elephant head hanging up on my wall in my man cave, and I got that tie hanging around his neck. So.
Oh, cool. So you've got the reminder.
Yeah.
Because you got, you said a man cave that you have in your place. So
Yeah.
you have a whole bunch of stuff hanging in there and
Yeah.
memories from your whole career. And
Yeah.
that's one of them, huh? Very cool. What was, say, one of your best days and or situations while you were, working in Vietnam, and one of your worst?
I caught typhus toward the end of my tour.
Oh, did you really?
My gamma-globulin shot didn't take care of that, and we'd had, shots for everything. But we had an outdoor theater, and I had tin roof, screen sides, and I went to Dr. Zhivago. Of course, it's all snowy and everything. And about halfway through the movie, I just got a terrible case of chills, just shaking like crazy. And I went back. I couldn't get to sleep that night, and I went on sick call the next day, and they took one look at me and admitted me.
Wow.
And I had a pretty tough time for a while. They couldn't get my fever down, so one of the orderlies would drag me down the hall and throw me in a cold shower.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're shaking already,
yeah, I could imagine.
That was pretty tough. I was in the hospital a couple weeks, maybe a little more. I figured I was going to live when they started making me make my own bed again. So.
Oh, really? How long did it get where you could eat food comfortably again with having that?
Not too long. It really was a pretty good weight loss program, because I really dropped a bunch of pounds during that period. And I remember they really weren't sure what I even had, because they had me laid out on a table, and they had an Army camp right next to us. So they had some Army doctors, Air Force doctors, and they had a Thai doctor. And I'm laying in there, and they're pointing out this or that on me, and I'm,
Were all of them speaking English?
They were. But
So you heard what they were saying.
I did, yeah. That was probably my worst experience. I was put in real jeopardy by a maintenance officer one time over there. Mm-hmm. I mentioned we had two different crews. We had the one crew that had our heavy equipment for if we had anything down on the runway or whatever. Well, they were off on some other details, so they said, okay, you guys in the shop are covering crash as well. And you're used to hearing 105s take off around the clock, and we heard one take off, something's wrong. It blew out part of the afterburner part way down the runway, and the crash alarm went off, and so we get down there, and he got stopped at the departure end barrier. And we were going to hook a tow rig on there, and the wheels were fused. They were supposed to melt before they would blow. Well, they weren't blowing, and we had the spikes underneath, and we were going to tow the airplane over it. And there's this maintenance officer, captain, showed up and said, don't spike those tires, put the blowers on them. I was pushing a steel cage we had up behind the main side that I was on, and the tire blew. And chunks of brake went about a softball-sized hole through these drop tanks.
Oh, my word.
All that fuel right on top of the hot brake, and the whole bottom side of the airplane was on fire.
Man, you're right there.
And it had 6 750s on it. We're armed, and missiles and everything else, and we were going to grab the pilot out, and he jumped out of the airplane. It's a long drop on a 105. He's hauling for the closest bunker, and I looked around, and our ranking guy that was in charge was heading for the bunker. I thought, there's no reason for me to be here.
No.
And they finally came in. You weren't going to get it with a fire extinguisher. It was they used to have I think they called them a Pedro. They were, the fire department had them, and they pulled right over the top of that airplane and put the fire out.
Wow. Probably not much choice on what to do there. You had to try, I suppose.
Yeah.
Or it just gets worse and worse and worse. Holy cow.
So that guy, just about got somebody killed. And besides that, well, we turned the airplane back over to the fighter squadron, and they got it out of there. And that's back when they used to use that animal foam fire extinguishing agent. It just stunk terribly bad.
Oh, yeah.
And they tried to wash it all up, but we ended up having to change the landing gear on that airplane because
I believe
we could have taken care of it if we'd have spiked those tires, see.
Right. Man. Well, my next question was going to be, when did you feel the most adrenaline through your whole career? Was that the story you would have told?
There was quite a bit of that.
There's some more?
Right there.
Yep.
And then not too long after that, we had a huge explosion in our ammo storage area at night, and it was the whole sky red.
What caused that? Do they know?
Yeah, I read the report on it. They were taking bombs off a pallet, and I don't know if they dropped one or whatever. There were some guys that didn't come back from it, put it that way. And that was pretty exciting.
Man, how far away were you from that when it went off?
I don't know how many. I forget. It was a few miles away, but I mean, you blow up a bunch of 750s, and
man, yeah. There's a couple of the guys I've interviewed. They talked about ammo dumps too, but a little smaller ammo dump, but a lot closer.
It was. I was never out there, but I know they had it sectioned off. They had. I mean, we had 4 squadrons going around the clock, so there was bomb trailers always out on the line, and they were back and forth,
Yeah. Did you have any attacks on the flight line or anything, or was it, like you described it when we first started? And that's why I've always felt, too, when people ask me that, we're on an air base. It's pretty secure with all those assets.
We were pretty well over in the center of the country. There was a couple of the northern bases had a little activity there, but to my knowledge, we never did.
So there was CE was never out there fixing blast holes in the runway or any of that kind of stuff then?
No, nothing
that's
like
good.
that.
That's a blessing then.
Yeah. Some of us were assigned as, were assigned as augmentees to the security police.
Mm-hmm.
They'd give you a club and a whistle and a radio and send you out on the edge of the jungle.
A club.
I was very, very careful not to get on that, but
my word.
We had the LBJA visit us one Christmas there while I was over there, and those guys all got called up and sent out and with their nightstick and a whistle.
Sounds like a 1940s movie or something you're describing instead of Night Watch for you guys.
I think we did have I had a rifle card. We had a cabinet of M16s in one of the nose docks there, but better off. Most Air Force guys better off not handling a weapon anyway,
Yeah, there is something to that. Did the USO or any of those people come through for entertainment for you or anything for a break?
I did get to see the Bob Hope show.
You did?
And he just happened to show up on my day off. I had one day off a week. So I got to go to that.
Oh, nice.
So that was cool. Yeah.
There probably wasn't much laughing going on in Vietnam, but that's why I mentioned the USO. Was that like your only laughter?
There were some USO shows coming around, and we had an airmen's club. They used to this back in the trim and proper days, but they used to bring strippers in from the Philippines. On base entertainment there, but
a little different than nowadays for sure.
Yeah.
It was definitely a different time back then. So,
yeah, I think they used to go to the O Club too. It wasn't just the Airmen's Club.
Sure. Well, I think we've gone a little ways here. I think we're just going to take a quick little break, walk around a little bit, and refresh if need be, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Well, we took a little breather here, and we're going to continue on with that 2-part question that I had. You told us about one of the worst days that you had. How about one of the best days that you've had?
Well, I can think of one pretty good one. I came back to McConnell again when I came back from Thailand, and I'm back on the flight line crewing again. So I'm back into another, I wouldn't say a foreign job again, but, to pick up some more experience in that. And I did that for about a year, and I ended up getting they had a wing crew chief and a maintenance man of the month award at McConnell. And somehow I ended up in that. And I think it's because we had a lieutenant that was a good fiction writer.
Yeah, whatever.
but and I
Pretty
didn't even,
modest.
I didn't know it at the time, but it included a ride in the F-105F.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at that time crewing an F model. And line chief came down the line. He says, "Well, you ready to fly?" And I said, "Yeah, she's ready." And he said, Not your airplane, you." Okay. He said, "Get on to life support and get your chute." So I got a ride down there, and I walked in there, and the life support guy says, "You're crew chief, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Okay. It's going to be simple." So I got a G suit that fit. I got a pair of gloves, a helmet, and a parachute. No flight suit or...
Oh, really?
No, I flew in my fatigues.
Wow. That's surprising.
Well, yeah, really. So the crew bus was leaving to go back out to the line, so I get on there with the pilot that I'm going to fly with, and he didn't really say too much, and I didn't do the walk around with him because I'd pre-flighted that. It was my airplane we stopped at.
Right.
So I just stowed my chute, crawled up in the back seat, and got all buckled in, and he just kind of climbed up and made sure I had everything hooked up, and he said, "I'll just say one thing. If we lose communications and that light comes on right there," and he pointed to it, he said, "Get ready," because the 105 had a bailout light in the back seat.
Uh-huh.
And that's the only thing he told me.
So he didn't like define get ready.
No.
Nothing like pull your arms in, pull your legs in.
Absolutely
anything.
nothing.
And nobody talked to you about this is the D ring you pull or any of that kind of stuff.
The guy was a tech too down in life support. I don't know if he was just lazy or what, but he said, "You're crew chief, right?" And I said, "Yeah." "All right." And that was it.
So we'll swing to the good side and think that, okay, well, these guys really know what's going on. But I don't know. I might lean toward the lazy part on that. Holy cow.
The good part was really not too many enlisted ever got to ride in the 105.
Right.
Because we were filling cockpits up for guys that were going over, But we went out in western Kansas. I think we were doing like an ACT mission with a D model. And the good part of it was I didn't throw up.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if he even remembered I was back there, kind of one of those things. You know how that goes.
Right.
And
do you know approximately what year that would have been?
This would have been in 1969.
69.
Yeah.
Have you ridden in other planes then?
I've ridden in everything I ever worked on.
Yep. So were many of those like cargo type jets, or were they all fighters?
Oh, I was a fighter guy all the way.
All the way.
But when we had the F-100, I got 3 rides in the 100, and I had a really good checkout from Bob Hargens on what you're supposed to do if you need to.
Yeah.
Everything I should have had before I got my first ride.
Yeah. Wow, for sure. So were they all mission rides back at that time when
Pretty
you were
much.
riding? Because
it wasn't an incentive.
I didn't think much
no.
incentive stuff was going on.
No,
back
that
then.
was just a perk if you happen to get one of those awards. I didn't figure I deserved it, but I wasn't going to turn it down either because nobody else had gotten one.
Right.
So I was kind of wondering though, part way down before we took off,
Well, since we're on this subject, what's your description of each one of the fighter rides, and did they get more thrilling as you got to the newer ones, or
well, I don't think I really even knew what to expect.
Right,
on the
especially your
first
first one.
On the first one, and the second one I got was with Brian Beatty. We went to Smoky Hill, and so in the 100, so made all the bomb and strafe passes and didn't get sick again. I was happy with that. I had been out the night before, and the ride just popped up in the morning. I said, "Oh, I could do that." And so I got to go to, when we were transitioning to the A7. We had pilots down there that were coming home for the weekend, so we were sending the F models down there. And if you wanted to go down, ride down, spend the weekend in Tucson, and then ride back again, and then, if you had somebody down there that could work on an F-100 if you needed to too.
Right.
So So I rode down there with Arlie Anderson and
Mm-hmm.
rode back with Jack Smeater.
Oh, there you go.
And that was another exciting time. We took off about noon, summertime in Tucson. And we rolled and we rolled and we rolled.
Tucson in the summer.
Tucson in the summertime.
Heat can make you sick faster than anything else.
And
rolling.
Well, the airplane's rolling. I mean, we're just starting to skip. It's wanting to take off, but
I see what you're saying.
We blew dust off the overrun when we took off.
Oh, I was missing. I just thought you're like up and rolling up
No,
here.
The airplane was rolling, and we weren't getting airborne.
Ooh, pucker factor.
It was really, and I don't know how many times through the years Smeater mentioned that to me. He said, "Yeah," he said, "I should have looked at those charts a little closer before we took off."
Man.
So that was exciting.
You remember who took you up in the 16?
Blake Johnson.
Blake did. Okay.
And I wasn't going to get a ride because I had already ridden in other fighters. And you know how it was to give people a chance.
Right.
But him and I needed to go to a worldwide F-16 maintenance conference in Hill.
I was going to ask, he was probably maintenance officer at the time.
And he was, yeah.
Okay.
And so he says, well, we'll just take the two-seater out there and save on our civilian travel pay, kind of a thing. Yeah, right.
Sure. Why not?
So we had to two-hop it out. I didn't have an altitude card or anything, so we stopped at Ellsworth and we bombed the Platte Winter Bridge on the way out, and everything that they like to do. Got as close to Rushmore as they let us, and stopped and got fuel in Ellsworth and went on to our conference. And when it was over, while we're leaving, and we were getting an equipment hot light. And he was turning off everything we didn't need. It was a VFR day, but we got airborne, and the cooling turbine froze up.
Oh.
Cockpit got really, really hot.
Oh, man.
And so we turned right around and came back in and landed. And they had one runway shut down and another one they were working on. We landed over the top of some equipment even, and we're landing towards town. We got stopped okay and taxied back up by ops, got out, and the crash alarm went off. I thought, well, Blake didn't declare an emergency, and we're safe. Well, one of the test center airplanes had taken off and went squirrely right after takeoff and crashed right on one runway.
Oh, man.
Pilot got out of it, but that fouled that runway.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are with a broke airplane and a broke runway. Went down to the Air Force Reserve, talked them into fixing our airplane. And we stayed an extra 3 days till they got the accident investigation team got out there and took pictures of, how they do,
right,
of everything involved with the crash. And it was one of the test center airplanes that went squirrely there. So I actually got 5 sorties on the F-16. One of them was only 7 minutes long.
Yeah.
And I was really glad that we got back in there, because if that airplane would have crashed, everybody that was airborne had to go to Salt Lake City.
Right.
And we were getting pretty hot in that cockpit.
Oh, and you're just absolutely trapped.
Yeah.
Altitude would have helped, but then you couldn't go over 18,000 also. So, ooh, man.
You'd probably forgot about that aspect.
Yes, I would think you would. The situation dictates cooler air. So,
yes. Yeah. So we did the two-hop on the way home, and he asked me where I wanted to go on the way back, and I'm down in the Irene-Yankton area, and we, made the tour around down there and flew around my old hometown a couple times, and
that's cool.
It's not too many Irene High grads have been able to say they did that.
Yep, starting with milking cows, and then now you're 1,000 feet above it.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun.
Wow. And so, trying to remember where we were at in your Air Force career, and let's go ahead and pick up from there.
We did. We used to go to California about every 3 months or 3.5. We were running a new class through. So got a number of TDYs out there, and starting to count down the days that I had left. And they came out and they said, any first-termers that aren't re-enlisting, we're letting you out 60 days early.
Really? And that was a 4-year that you signed up for?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay. Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
The only thing about it was I had a line number for staff that I would have made before I got out.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, I'm never going to need another stripe. Let me out 2 months early, you know?
Little did you know.
Little did I know. So then by the time I got into the Guard, I'd been out 3 years, and I lost several years' time and grade and started over at day one as a buck sergeant again.
Oh, okay. Back when they had buck sergeants.
And that's where that nickname came from.
I was gonna say, I should have asked that before.
Well,
so let's go into that.
Well, when I got hired, I got hired off the street. I went to guard drill on Saturday and Sunday and started on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the phase docks because I'd never worked on an F-100 before. They started me in there. And about 6 months in, Dean Axtell was the OMS branch chief, and he says, what do you think about transferring out to the flight line? And I'm thinking, it's December. We only had the one hangar. Everything's outside. It's cold. I said, I just kind of feel like I'm just getting to the point I'm pulling my weight in here. He said, well, that's good. Report to the flight line on Monday. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the guys wanted to swap. One of the guys wanted to come in, and that's what I wanted to do.
Sure.
Anyway, so anyway, we were 24 UE at that time, and we had a lot of crew chiefs, and other than me, the rest of them were all tech sergeants.
Mm-hmm.
And old George Dammer hung that buck on me. He says, you're nothing but a effing buck. So he started calling me that.
Yeah.
And others did. And one night I was strapping old Colonel Berger into my F-100, and he said, thanks, Buck. I thought, now I got the big dog calling me.
Yep.
And that's, a lot of people don't know what my real name is. So
as long as I've known you, I've never asked you, A lot of times you don't ask about call signs, just depends.
That's where that came from.
Have you been asked that quite a bit through your career, or we just all accept Buck? Because, like I said, I had to
I have been, but where Bob Fudness was back here last week at our last safety meeting, and him is Bob. Mm-hmm. Well, my real name is Bob as well. Yep. As we're kind of talking, isn't it funny? Like a lot of people only know him by Bubba. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people only know me by Buck. And I said, here we got a simple name like Bob, and we end up with a nickname.
Yeah.
So it's one of them things.
Yeah, so getting into the Guard, you said there was 3 years in between. What was going through your head, and what was going on in that time frame?
Well, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I got out of the Air Force. I worked construction for a summer. I knew I didn't want to continue in that, and I could still get into Lake Area Tech that fall. And I thought some of my friends had gotten their A&P license and went to work for the airlines. Mm-hmm. So I went to Lake Area. It was a 14-month, 8-hour-a-day school for both license. And I'm still, I didn't really want to get into general aviation. I'm still thinking airlines, but you couldn't buy an airline job at about the time that I got my ticket.
Right.
So one of the guys in the class ahead of me had applied with the Air Force Reserve, and he had a pamphlet on their technician program. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I might like to do that, and so I had a couple applications in with the Reserve. They do it by regional areas. So then I was in Sioux Falls one day. I thought, well, I think I'll just stop out at the Air Guard and see what they got going on, and drove around trying to find out where there might be a recruiter, because finally I figured the admin building had a flag in front of it, so there might be somebody in there that knows. Right. Excuse me. So Toby Fladmark was a recruiter at that time, and he took me around, and he said, well, I got a couple full-time jobs on the board here if you want to apply. And I was familiar with those forms you needed to fill out for the civil service job. And so I said, yeah, I'll give that a shot. And I got a call a week or two, and I was supposed to come up and see Lieutenant Colonel Tunke. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go meet this guy. I got a haircut, put on a, sport coat and a tie, and I didn't realize I was going to meet every chief and colonel on the base in Colonel Berger's office, the way they used to do that job interview. But I was already too deep into it not to walk in and have the interview. So,
Wow. That was Justin Berger.
Justin Berger. He was the end of the table, and then I don't know how many. That long table was full.
I have a set of elk antlers in the garage of an elk that he shot.
Really?
Yep. He was hunting with Bob Jameson, decades ago, and ended up not wanting those. And Bob's son Jammer was cleaning out a shed and found those and had known the story that they were back in there, so he found them. So donated them to the hog house here. So they're not in here yet, but I'm going to make sure there's a sign that people know that it was his elk. So anyway, that's a side note there. But you met everybody, all the important people on base then, huh?
Well, not knowing, the one lieutenant colonel thought I was going to meet was there, but the DCM was there, and the other assistant maintenance officer, and the branch chiefs of the different sections, and and then there was one tech sergeant in there. I thought, I wonder what he's doing in there with all these chiefs. It was Vern Pins. He was the union rep.
Oh, there you go.
But
well, it wasn't common to have full-time positions available,
no,
let alone 3 of them.
No, I don't know if where they'd come up. Actually, there were 2, and I found out later that one of the old boys that was on the C-54 had retired, and they had another man year, and they decided to hire 3. Well, I was the third. I was the third guy because I wasn't a unit member at that time, and they really didn't know me from Adam.
Right.
But coincidentally, when I got the call that I got that job, I also heard from an Air Force Reserve unit that wanted me to come to work for them. It was a new C-130 unit starting, and I had only just flown on C-130s. That's the only thing I'd had to do with them. But
would that have been part-time or full-time?
No, it was full-time.
That was full-time as well.
Full-time, yes.
Wow. Hot commodity you were.
So, well, I would have been in Biloxi, Mississippi, working on weather reconnaissance C-130s. I was
going to ask you where.
But I would have gone because I was, I needed to.
Yep, that was your only choice. But since you had a choice,
yeah,
it's kind of cool that you stayed up
I think
here.
it paid 25 cents more an hour starting in Sioux Falls than it did in Biloxi too.
Oh, really? Well, we're not used to that, are we? Usually we're on the lower end.
Yeah, yeah. So that's how I landed there.
Wow, it's come in full-time right away. We're, and as far as I know, the full-time guard, they were wearing the uniform during the week.
Yes.
All the time. So that's kind of always the way it had been because the reserves, I think they wear civvies.
They had the option of doing that. And they had some of those, whatever title they are, that didn't necessarily need to belong to the reserve to work there too. Title 5 or something. But,
right, yep.
Yeah. So, no, I never knew anything about the Air Guard. I kind of wondered when I was at McConnell first there, the guard down there had F-100s, Kansas Guard, on the other side of the runway from us.
Right.
And they used the same arming area as we did. And I'm down there, I'm a one-striper, we're doing last chance and stuff. And here's these old tech sergeants out there on these F-100s, they're looking real old,
Right.
And besides that, I wonder what those guard guys are doing out here during the middle of the week.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about technician programs or anything. So,
yeah, and that's pretty common.
Yeah,
there's a lot of active duty people that they start thinking about other things to do, or they meet some guard people on a deployment or something, and they get educated on what we are, and they're pretty surprised at the opportunity that we have. I feel very fortunate having found it. Actually, I was growing up in Elk Point, and there's a crew chief, Dave Harkin. Do you ever know him down in Sioux City? Yeah, so we were in the same hometown, and he was trying to get me into the Guard through, high school and up too. And then when I did finally go in, it was in the Sioux City unit down there. But yeah, Dave Harkin, he was a great guy.
Yeah, we worked with those guys all the time, back and forth to Sioux City. So we knew them pretty well.
Right.
Good guys.
So what year did you come in full-time at the South Dakota Guard up here then?
73.
73, okay. So a little bit of time had gone by.
Yeah, still had one uniform yet, so pulled it out of the closet and dusted off my buck sergeant stripes. And
yeah. Not like later on when they change, seems like they change uniforms every 5 years.
Right.
Did you keep track how many different uniforms you wore?
The best one in my mind that we had was when they went to perma-press fatigues.
That's what I started
for a
in.
mechanic. And the old cotton ones were they didn't look very good unless you sent them to the cleaners,
Right.
starched up and weren't very comfortable. And
Yeah, those fatigues. I mean, you could cut the sleeve off and get them hemmed, and you
Yeah.
had short sleeve. You had the low quarters you could wear with them if you didn't need to have boots on. And
those are, we used to call those 7-level shoes.
yeah, there you go.
April 16th was my discharge date from the Air Force, and I saw a picture of me. I was looking through some of those pictures. I'm standing in front of my car with a short sleeve fatigue shirt on and low quarters because I didn't want to buy any more combat boots. I didn't need any more of them. I was getting
Right.
out. So
Did you happen to keep like one set of every uniform you wore?
I have a set of I do have a set of the desert camos and a set of BDUs. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And I do have a jungle fatigue shirt from they issued you tropical fatigues when you got over there too, which are just the green version of a BDU shirt, but it was just something else you didn't have to buy out of your clothing allowance. So
Right.
I think I got one of those left too, but probably wouldn't fit, but
Hey, that's nothing wrong with that. I definitely don't fit in mine anymore either. That is for sure. I think I'm going to go over to the table over here and grab something. So before we get into more of your Air Guard career, I'm just going to, these are the pictures that you brought, but just go ahead and talk about each one of the pictures that you brought, and then I'll show it up and on the screen, and so people can see these pictures that you brought.
well, that's me and sitting on the front steps of my hooch over in Thailand, 1967. Just made 2 stripes, which was Airman Second at that time, so wasn't out of high school year yet.
Yeah, man.
We wore those bush hats over. They weren't very comfortable, but they're it's
Right. Kind of different with the one side.
and that's the way
Well, it
you
looks like that.
you weren't supposed to wear them like a cowboy hat. You were supposed to. I just grabbed a couple here. That'd be in front of the shelter that I had over in Belgium.
How many times did you go to Belgium?
Just once, just with the A7s.
Oh, just okay. I thought I missed out on more of those, but I guess not because I was on that. It was our checkered flag base.
Yeah,
That term's come back now.
I heard that.
I don't know if it means the same thing, but it's come back.
I've told one or two of those command chiefs that come over to the coffee, I said, I can still pick up on some of those terms you're using. But most of these people here don't have any idea what you're talking about.
Nope, not at all.
There again, there's one you change back again.
Right.
What else do I have here? This was at Morone Air Base and then on the way home from Saudi Arabia.
Yep, Morone Air Base, Spain.
Yep.
And we only did Saudi once, right?
Yes.
Okay. And for some reason, that was like my least favorite.
That was my least favorite.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember we had to live, we had the area that we lived, and then they would bus us or whatever over to where we worked. And that's all you could do. They had a swimming pool there and stuff. But I remember Colonel Walls at the time, we got over there, and part of his in brief was, okay, there's not a lot to do here. He said, now, don't be sitting on the couch reading a magazine and watching a movie. He said, read a magazine, and some other time, watch a movie. None of that extra stuff. But
Right.
Chris Langloss and I got to leave early because we had to go to
Right.
Morone Air Base. He was receiving the jets, making sure transient alert and everything, or whoever was going to handle your jets was good to go. And I had to collect weapons from the pilots that came in. So
That was probably my least favorite deployment of all the ones I went on.
yeah,
And
definitely.
that was strictly, part of it was the time frame we went over there. That was less than 2 months after 9/11.
Oh, it was that?
Yeah.
I had lost track of that
Yeah.
part.
And the Air Force was still jumping through their rear.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 10 different airframes flying over there, and we were the only reserve component airplane.
Mm-hmm.
So consequently, the total force thing seemed to be left out a little bit there. With their QA and safety seemed to thought we were the best target.
Oh,
so
sure.
they were.
Yeah. And there's usually a little animosity between active duty and
A little bit
reserve
of that.
or guard.
Yeah,
and they just
and
have their chance to get at you.
We got, I was happily went over on the Advon for our group, and I got to go to the maintenance meeting with my counterpart from Sioux City.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered when you go to that baby, you better know what's going on with your airplanes.
Yeah.
There was a lieutenant colonel from Langley that was a DCM, and he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And he would dress you down in front of the whole big group
Yep.
if you didn't have what you needed to know about your airplanes. So I was happy that I'd got to see how it was going. I made sure I had all our ducks in a row with what was going on with our airplanes. But toward the end of and I got along well with that guy. I mean, he was fine. He commanded respect. There was no doubt about
Right.
that.
Nothing wrong with that.
But getting towards the end of the deployment, there was another F-16 unit there that was going to rotate back to the States, and they were having trouble with one of their airplanes. And he was getting on my counterpart over there pretty good for a couple of days. And finally he says, Sergeant so-and-so, you better go talk to those Air Guard guys. I think they can fix that airplane for you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Of course, I said, well, yes, sir, we'll help you with
That was
anything
like the
we
biggest
can.
compliment you could
Well,
get.
it was, but every head in the room turned and looked at me. He never did come back to us and ask for help. What he wanted to do is cannibalize parts for troubleshooting.
Right.
And on F-16, you do that, and you get in a whole world of hurt for the follow-on you need to do on it.
Right.
So,
So who are the guys in this photo here?
well, we got Dan Wheeler. We got, you should know that one next to Wheeler. He was the first sergeant on that.
Bruce Anderson.
Bruce Anderson. Mm-hmm. Well, that's me there.
There you go. I wondered if one of them should end up being that, but I just asked. And I recognize that guy too.
Yeah, he was actually the OIC of our deployment, and then but he was a maintenance officer at home. That's where you're going to embarrass me here too.
Oh, the first thing you lose when you retire is names, and you've been out for quite a while.
And he always went to the maintenance meeting too, and that being a traditional way, I always tried to
Help him out a
help
bit.
him out. Yeah,
You bet.
and the colonel kind of liked him too, so that was a good.
Oh, there you
That
go.
was a good deal there.
All right.
And then
What
that
else?
was my next airplane.
And that was in retirement?
Yep. A couple of years after I retired.
Yeah, after a while we're gonna get into this.
All right.
So we'll
That's the only other picture. And that's just a cockpit shot there.
okay. Of this
Yeah.
airplane.
Yep.
Pretty big smile there, retired and doing this. Yeah, we'll get into that. They'll see more of what we're talking about coming up here. So yeah, so you made some pretty good friends through the Air Guard too, I'm sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I missed. I don't know if you had any breaks in service anywhere along the line, but I was out 3 years. And my last squadron in the Air Force was a pretty tight outfit, and I really missed that.
Yeah, there's something to that. There's a lot to that. Yeah, and a lot of that is, whether it was Vietnam era, Korea, the World Wars, of course, Iraq, Afghanistan. A lot of the stories that I'm reading, the reintegration is huge. Of course, the Vietnam era, they didn't get any decent welcome home, a lot of animosity. They've at least learned through the years that there is a grave importance to reintegration. And, people react differently to things that they've experienced. There's a lot of different levels of what people have experienced, but there's, PTSD can be a factor with less war interaction than what some people think. It just depends on the job that they had. And just one example is a person that I know from our unit that ended up having to deal with mortuary affairs and all that stuff, having a lot of people go through there. Now, it wasn't a lot of gore and all that kind of stuff, but just the thought of what they were doing really did a number on him with reintegration from that deployment there as well. With that, I think what I'll do is rewind us a little bit. I think this is the time to do it. You talked some about family members that have been in the Guard, grandfather, World War I, your father in World War II. So part of the question is, did they talk much, or did they tell you stories that you remember as a younger man? And were there any other people in your family that served?
Well, my grandfather was in the Army in World War I. Actually, he was a bugler.
Really?
And I have his bugle.
You do? Is that hanging in your man cave?
It's in my man cave. Yes, it is. And I actually have, they didn't come out with the Purple Heart till post, I don't know what year, but he was combat wounded from an artillery strike, and I have his Purple Heart too.
Oh, that is sweet.
But he, like I'd mentioned earlier, he tried to dissuade me from going into the combat arms end of the military,
Well, and back in that era, I think people talked less anyway, but did he tell you any stories? Not that I'm looking for blood and gore or anything, but just any of his experience did he pass on to you, or did he just try to steer you away from what you were saying?
Oh, we talked a little bit about it. Nothing real intense or anything. Just coming and going on troop ships, getting over to France, and, not a very pleasant experience.
Oh, yeah.
At that point. And
then,
not a lot.
Then your father with World War II?
My dad was in the Army Air Corps. He worked and flew on B-17s.
Mm-hmm. Oh, a tie to...
And he was gone before I ever got into that program, but I'd heard a lot about him. Mm-hmm. And luckily for him, he was over in the Philippines and New Guinea, not over in England. Not that they didn't have their losses over there. It was a different kind of a war they were fighting over there. They didn't have nearly as many B-17s over there, and it had a little bit of everything over there. Mm-hmm. So,
what was his job with the B-17s?
He was a mechanic, and then he flew some as a flight engineer too. Mm-hmm. So he was on flying status. So
yeah,
of course that was the first time he was ever on an airplane. Farm kid, and I don't think he ever got over it. Really, he loved that.
Mm-hmm. There have been some opportunities with some of the World War II bombers at different air shows and things. Did your dad ever get a chance to get in it post-military?
I think one of my cousins was a private pilot, and he was going to Oshkosh one year, and Dad flew along over with him. But I don't think he got a ride or anything. He got around. But they always had some B-17s on.
Got to be around.
A little bit of everything over there, of course, but yeah.
Nice. Yep.
Yeah.
Any other family members that you know of that served in any capacity?
Not any close relatives.
Mm-hmm. But having your grandfather, father, and you straight line, that's something to be proud of for sure.
Yeah, Grandpa used to try and teach me how to play that bugle, but I couldn't do it.
So we'll swing back to closer times here into the Air Guard, and you made some pretty close friends there. One of them being Murdoch. We had talked when I first had mentioned that I was going to start doing podcasts like this. There was a great unknown on what this baby was going to be like or whatever, but I remember talking to you and Murdoch, mentioning early on about possibly doing one of these and stuff. But what are some of your memories of Murdoch?
Well,
you have a lot of them, I know. You
his career kind of paralleled mine. We graduated high school the same year, joined the Air Force right at the same time. But he got sent on his first deployment to Wheelus Air Force Base, Libya.
Really?
And he was on F-100s over there.
And this is Lee Benninger we're talking about.
Lee Benninger, yes.
Murdoch.
Mm-hmm. And there were guys, when I got out of tech school, were getting sent over there, and I was thinking all the time, well, I'll probably end up in Vietnam, and there's guys that are getting sent to Africa. Mm-hmm. And I'd just soon go the other way. I didn't want to go over there. But so I think Lee took a short. He re-enlisted once. He had 6 or 7 years active duty before he came out to the Guard.
That's a while.
Yeah. Good on the retirement check,
Yeah. Yeah. Did he ever tell you what swayed his mind to go back into the military at all?
I don't know where. one of his active duty assignments was a DM, and he might have had some connection with the Air Guard down there.
Mm-hmm.
So other than that, he never really mentioned it. And we went to a lot of places together.
Yeah. Yeah, and you hear it at the people's retirements too, when they list where they've been, it was all over in the U.S., they don't even start naming states because you'd be there forever. But what are, whether with or without Murdoch, what are some of the countries, or as many as you can remember, the countries that you've been to?
Well, the first European one was Norway, and then it was England, Belgium, and then over accepting the first group of F-16s in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, getting to travel around, we were over there about 6 weeks, I think, so we got around to a lot of different countries.
That had to have been cool.
Yeah, it really was. We had the weekends off and had rental cars. If we put the gas in them, we could take them anywhere we wanted. So
yeah, that's sweet.
It was, yeah. And, of course, Turkey.
Yep. Did you do 2 of those or 1?
Did 2.
Yeah, what was it, like 96 and 2002, I think, right in there, if I remember right?
Yeah, because I went on the last one there. I was over there one last Christmas and New Year's overseas before I got out. I got out the end of January.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So actually Murdoch and I had the same apartment. I don't know if you were over there on that last one. If you weren't a chief or an officer, you were living in a tent by then.
Mm-hmm. I was in the tents there.
Which were Air Force tents, which is different.
Yeah, they weren't bad. I mean, we're grilling food right outside every night and having a pretty good time. Yep, did a lot of good work, but it was nice. It was kind of cool. That's where I spent the most money ever, like on gifts and stuff. So was the first one in '96, where you could just walk off the base and it had the whole shopping area there. We were quite a ways from the city of Adana. I don't think anybody was able to go over there. I mean, maybe there was, but
I went there one day. A friend of mine had made friends with a guy that had one of those woodworking shops that was in the alley, and he needed to take some of his blades into town to get sharpened into Adana, and he wanted to know if we wanted to ride along in with him. He'd been in the Turkish army. He got out. He had good English, so we took his blades over to this place to get sharpened. It was like going back into the Stone Age. He's walking into this where the guys are sharpening blades and stuff. But he took us all over the city, and took us out to eat. Mm-hmm. And I stayed away from raw vegetables over there. You never knew what they were going to
that was a good general plan
fertilize them with. But
every time we were overseas.
And then he took us to a mosque, huge mosque. And we had to take our shoes off to go in there. I was a little uneasy in there. It was a big one. There was a lot of men in there in their prayer session.
Right.
And finally he said, well, we better get out of here, otherwise somebody will steal our shoes.
Oh, geez.
So we're in their place of worship. You got to worry about getting your shoes stolen.
Yeah. Oh, man. And they can tell they're not indigenous shoes, probably,
It makes me think of another fun story going back to Thailand.
Uh-huh.
This friend of mine, actually, he was from Alcester. I got hooked up with him, and he was one of the fighter squadrons. And I was in field maintenance, and we went downtown to one of the classier bars in downtown that didn't have dirt floors, and it had a bamboo floor, and you had to take your shoes off. Mm-hmm. So there was a big pile of shoes by the door. And when I left, somebody had he left first, and somebody had swiped his shoes. So he found a pair that fit him. And when I left, my shoes were gone.
Uh-huh.
And so I found the best set that I had that fit me. And I was off the next day, and he came by my hooch, and he was bitching about somebody stole his shoes, and he was off that day too. And he said, "Look what I got stuck with. He had my shoes."
I thought that's what you were going to say.
Out of this big pile, and they were all. He made me take mine back and give him this other pair I had, because I'd traded up when I got the new one. So.
Yep. What are the chances?
Yeah, it was a pretty good sized pile too. I mean, just
man.
kind of sorted through them.
Well, it takes one person to do the wrong thing to snowball into all kinds of trouble.
No doubt.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm glad you went back to that story because I didn't say it earlier, but whatever comes to mind, we can jump all over. This doesn't have to be completely chronological. So, so how many years were you full time in the Air Guard then?
Well, I started in July of 73, and I retired January 31st, 2003. And my enlistment didn't run out until July, so actually I had 30 years in the Guard, and then however many months short of July. But I had the 4 years active, so I had plenty of time to retire on when I hit the magic number. So
You bet. Nice. Now, you mentioned hobbies earlier. My question will go back a little bit, but my guess is I don't want to put words in your mouth, but being a dairy farm kid, did you have any hobbies when you were younger that you did, or was your time pretty much spent working?
well, I never got to play Little League because we were too far from town.
Yeah.
But we always had a horse and a dog.
Do you have a saddle for the horse?
Oh, yeah, we did, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them say, nope, yeah, just bareback is all they
rode them
had.
both ways, too. But
Right.
so operating a lot of machinery, you just did back in the day like that,
Mm-hmm.
Other than little hunting, little fishing, that's about it.
Mm-hmm. Did you have hobbies while you were working in the Air Guard, or besides the one we're going to talk about here, were there other hobbies that you got into after retirement, or continued some that you had before you retired? How did that go?
Well, I bought a 67 Mustang a couple of years before I retired.
There you
And
go.
that was my restoration project on that.
How bad a shape was it in?
Well, actually, not bad, because I was the second owner on it. It's the lady that was the owner. She'd been in the movie industry out in California, and her husband had bought her for her. He passed away, and she got up there in her years, and she had family back here, and she wanted to move back. So she moved in one of the retirement homes and had the car trucked back here, and it sat in the corner of the garage in this old folks home for quite a few years.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the original window sticker on the thing.
Really? Oh, man. How'd you come across that? She advertised it?
Actually, a friend of ours was working in that facility, and she knew that I'd been kind of looking around for something. She said, you might want to check on that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they're a money pit.
Oh, yeah.
You ever get into restoring anything, but it was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you didn't really get into it because of not wanting to spend money for sure, but the satisfaction of it. Did you, because you did mechanics through your whole career and stuff, so did you have to work on the engine and stuff too? Or
It was a 289. You could overhaul the carburetor on it and plugs and points and change oil and all the fluids and, really. And it was a California car, so it had a smog pump on it, which I got rid of.
Never heard that term, smog pump.
Yeah. The emissions
Yep.
started way early out there. I think the original window sticker on it was a pretty fancy one, was $3,700.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally got to the point where I wanted to get it painted, the best estimate I got was $5,000.
Oh, yeah. Try to get your money back from that restoration.
Yeah, and I didn't really need any body work. I scuffed it all out, sanded it, and I had it pretty well ready to paint, but still.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun driving around until one day I about got rear-ended, and I thought, I got too much money in this thing. It's time somebody else owns it.
So that did it.
Yeah.
Oh. How many years did you own it at that point?
Oh, geez, I probably had it 10 years.
So you got some good use out of it.
Oh, I did, yeah. And I got
Or how many years post full restoration? Were you 5 years into it and had it ready?
probably, but a lot of that was cosmetic stuff, and you can rebuild a Mustang from the ground up from all the catalogs. You can order things on,
Sure.
So I do a little bit of that at a time, and it was drivable pretty much all the time.
Right.
But it was fun.
Yeah.
I did. The only car show I took it to was at the Legion. Post 15, and the only show they ever had that I remembered. But I got
Is that Brandon?
I got no in Sioux Falls.
Sioux Falls.
I got Best Ford,
There you go.
but I kind of knew the judges anyway, so
Oh, you don't need to downplay it. That's a nice car.
yeah, it was a nice car, and it was kind of interesting the sale of it too. I put it on a worldwide or a United States wide deal where you could, for $50, you could advertise a specific year car.
Mm-hmm.
And I would, that's good until it was sold.
Mm.
So I got calls from all over on the thing.
And that was online, not on a magazine type thing?
It was online.
Yep.
And they finally got a call from down central Nebraska from a guy. I mean, he wanted to know everything about that car. They wanted to know, where it was built, engine specs, and all kinds of different specifications. He was pretty particular about it. And
Mm-hmm.
tell him what I wanted for it, and he showed up. And we showed up in Sioux City. He called me. He says, "Now you live in Sioux City, right?" I said, "No."
The common
You gotta-
mistake,
You got to keep going north. And I was in Brandon at the time, and he showed up, and had a trailer with him, and I had a price that I wanted for it, and I did give a little bit on it. But after he wrote me the check, I later found out the guy was well worth. I was a little worried about taking a check from somebody too.
Right.
But I asked a friend of mine who'd had classic cars. He said, "How you work that? You get a cashier's check? Do you get cash?" He said, "Well, where's the guy at?" And I told him down in Nebraska. He said, "Well, I've got a friend down there that I've bought cars from. I'll call him and see if he knows anything about it."
Mm-hmm.
So this guy runs into the guy I sold the car to that night at a car show, and he told him, "You better get up and buy that car." So when the guy shows up to see me, he said, "What are you doing, running a background check on me or what?"
I figured you were going to say that was
Yeah.
there was the link right there.
Yeah, that was the link. Well, come to find out, he was buying it for his wife, and that was the car that they had when they got married and took on their
Really?
honeymoon. The same color, everything was the same.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
That it was really,
Mm-hmm.
and he called me the next day, and I thought, hope it didn't blow up or something right away, He said, "No, I just wanted to tell you I took it to the All Mustang car show in Lincoln, and I got second place in stock."
Nice.
So
Oh, very
that
cool.
was kind of one of those fun things to mess with,
Oh, yeah. Yep. And just the enjoyment of entering into retirement. Well, and you said that was a number of years before you retired.
I had it a couple
Also,
years before I
couple
retired,
years,
but
yeah.
I hadn't done much to it. I just,
Yeah. Till after when you have a
Yeah.
little more time. But then most of the retirees you talk to, they're like, "I don't know how I had time to work." They're just so busy.
it's too easy to put things off till the next day,
Yeah. I'm 4.5 years out now, but my main thing is the soft starts in the morning. And every day I got something to do. One thing or six things. Could be a 30-minute job or 8-hour job, but I don't start any of it till after 9:30 with your soft start, couple coffees, computer stuff,
That
whatever.
sounds familiar.
Yeah, yeah. So we lose that many. We don't lose, but it's part of that equation there. Anyway, you had also mentioned something that really sparked my interest. You said something about a memoir.
Yeah, I'd always joked about writing my memoirs,
Mm-hmm.
and I never really did any of that. Well, my mother saved every letter that I'd wrote home from when I was in Thailand.
Uh-huh.
And I went out, Peer had quite a welcome home Vietnam vets thing in 2006.
Nice.
Went out to this big celebration out there, and I thought, this might be a good place to start this.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to write about that year, and I knew what I was doing on a specific day because I had written it in those letters Mom gave back to me. So I started on that, and then I always kept notes on every deployment, something about the country and what specific things we did.
Right.
So I've pretty much written about every trip.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything, but
I think I remember talking to you one day, and you just made a light mention of that you wrote things down about each deployment. I thought that was pretty cool. So have you written a complete memoir now then, or is it multiples?
well, I got it in a big binder book. I wrote about basic training and tech school and first assignments, and then worked on into the guard end of things and my B-17 thing. And so it's pretty thick. Spell check is wonderful.
So I was going to ask you if it's digital. So it is.
My sister was an English teacher. I haven't let her read it yet because I'd probably still end up with a bunch of red marks on my things grammatical errors. But
well, I was going to ask you. I'll ask you right now if I'd love to read that thing sometime. And I just read a memoir from a basketball coach from our high school, and he just kept track of all kinds of things. I thought that was pretty interesting. But we'll talk again a little bit later. But
if you really get bored somewhere,
I don't put it that way. I would love to read that. Those things are so interesting.
And I deployed to Panama 9 times, so I was there on the first go and the last one.
Okay.
So a lot of,
yeah, when I got out of active duty, got into, with a Dave Harkins unit down in Sioux City, I was working a manufacturing job, and I think that was Sioux City's, and I didn't go. I was just past it. Their last trip to Panama was right about in that time frame. So I never made any of those deployments.
You didn't work for Wilson Trailer, did you?
Nope.
Sioux City outfit?
No, I was in Elk Point down at Aladdin Industries with steam cleaners.
I did that for a year after I got out of A&P school. I built semi-trailers for Wilson Trailer Company.
There you go.
Until I got enough money where I could afford to take off and go look for a job somewhere.
So the process of writing the memoir, you started with you had the letters that you had written. Did you start like from your childhood on and go from there?
Yeah,
or
kind of.
Okay.
And then, of course, I saved every one of my orders I had for deployments. And an old guy in the Air Force told me, he said, you need to hang on to your orders. Someday there might be something you'll need from those.
Yes.
And I'd always write something along with the particular order I had for whatever country we were going to or whatever. No.
As a maybe for sure, but as a guess, how many pages do you think that is? She's about that thick.
Just
nice.
Not front and back, but
sure. Double space or single?
Single.
Oh my word. Yeah. I might wait till next winter to read that.
It'd probably be wintertime would be a good time.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be cool. I would love to be able to read that. Yeah, for sure. So you've had a lot of experiences through the Guard. Did you write in there? Was it all in your Air Guard time based on deployments and stuff, or were there just other like day-to-day things that you included in that?
Pretty much deployments, because that's where I had the background.
Yep.
Things I'd written down already. So.
That is really cool. I've said it many times here now, but
have you ever done anything like that yourself?
No. Nope. And I've been interested in people's histories and things of that, before I even started doing this. And I told you before we started how I really enjoy hearing people's stories. And there's people that I ask to do this, and a lot of them say, I don't have anything to say, or I'm not interesting enough, or whatever. And I'm like, hey, let me be the judge of that, and people that nobody's done it yet, but if somebody didn't want it on YouTube, I say, I'll give you a digital copy because this is for your friends and your family. And I've never recorded stuff for myself, but I really, really enjoy reading what other people have written. And memoirs, you don't hear about memoirs very much from, your common friends around the area.
Well, it started out as kind of a joke. What are you going to do when you retire? Well, I go write my memoirs.
So you followed through on that.
And then when I got going on it, I thought, well, sit down. And
so was it post-retirement then,
yes,
where you actually sat
strictly
down?
Post-retirement. Actually, it was after that Vietnam celebration they had in Pierce. So that would have been 2006. So I'd been retired 3 years already then.
Have you done honor flight?
No. But I've been to D.C. I've got a niece that lives out there, so I've had the full tour, and I always figured I would just soon let somebody else go that's not seen things out there,
Well, they've gotten far enough along. I mean, they got, everybody that, contacted them or found out about it, whatever. As far as I know, they're done with the World War II stuff unless there's a straggler or two out there. And quite a few years ago, they got into the Vietnam vet area, Korean and Vietnam.
Oh, there's
vet.
not too many left. One of the things
Right.
I've done, I'm on the honor guard for post 15 for probably the last 12, 13 years, and we've kind of run out of World War II vets. You seldom do a funeral,
Right.
and it's pretty much gone for Korea and well into Vietnam.
2 years ago, or actually a little more than a year ago, I found out that there's actually a Vietnam Vet Day, March 29, specifically 73. And that's why they made March 29 the day for that. And the book that I mentioned earlier is, and I'll try to remember to show you when we're done here and visiting, Vietnam Vets Still Coming Home is what it's called, and their stories in their words. And it's a hardcover. It's heavy-duty book, and it's about this thick, and there's 31 people in there with their stories. And like I said, I've interviewed, I think, at least 4 people that are in that. But one of them is Gene Murphy's in a wheelchair, but he works at the DAV in Sioux Falls.
Right.
So every year they have an event there. Last year, Easter was early, so it happened to be on Good Friday. And then this past year here, just recently, it was on Friday the 28th. But they have Vietnam vets of the area. They all show up there, and they also have the ceremony for the 7 South Dakota MIAs. And they have a flag for each one. They have their name. They have a book with whatever information they have on them or not, or what they have on them. So I didn't know if you'd ever heard about that at all or had an invite.
Talking about Murphy there, I think it was in the South Dakota magazine. They had an article about what he went through.
Yeah,
him and his buddy.
Yep, Lyle Bowes. Actually, 2 months ago, I think it was, or a little less than 2 months ago, I interviewed both of them together at the DAV. Lyle Bowes, his son owns it now, the gravel pit just south of Brookings on the west side of the interstate there. And on the side of his property, he put up his own, not for him, but his own Vietnam vet memorial there. It's got statues there, some, I can't remember what's behind him, if there's some stone up there, but you walk up to it up these stairs and it starts playing patriotic music and stuff. And he's actually getting an award here this last Friday in April, in a week or two here. And one of the ladies associations, he's getting like their top award from one of the ladies war associations. I don't remember which one it is, but I might drive up there and witness that with him there. And there's a couple other guys in there that I've interviewed, which is really fun. A few of the people that I've talked to in that book, they've done that. And I've helped, just wheel people up to it, the honor flight, and also did the flag thing the second time there. But the people that have already been there and seen, what you've seen, it's still a different feel. You're with that whole group of people. Each one has an escort. Maybe you'd have a family member to take with you. And I would highly encourage you.
The day that my niece took me out there, 2 different groups had come in to the memorial there, and it was really kind of cool to see that.
Yes. Yeah, so
the escort that they had coming in,
I wouldn't be shy or modest about maybe trying to get on one of those flights. I think there's some going on like right now. There's maybe 1 out of Sioux City and 2 out of Sioux Falls, maybe in this 3-month period or something like that. But, you look it up online or whatever, but they're still doing them. And I haven't heard an ending time at all. But in my podcast 2 guys ago was my high school assistant wrestling coach and a teacher. And I didn't even know he was a Vietnam vet at the time, and he served in Thailand. But he did that with his grandson. And it was 2 months later, his grandson passed away. And it was just such a sad deal. But and I don't remember if he had been in D.C. before, but what a special thing to do it with a family member as well and have that experience with all those other people side by side with you. So, yeah, I think a lot of that honor flight thing.
Yeah, I talked to several people in the one group anyway when I was there, just seeing where they're from, what they're up to, and they were pretty excited about being there.
Right. Hero Haven locally does things like that, taking people hunting and fishing, and Jammer, and I think Justin Sisson. I'm not sure if Dane's involved with it as well. He might have been involved earlier on, but they take military and first responders fishing and things. And when they have their meetings, one of the things that they deal with the most around here is people being modest and just thinking, well, I didn't do that much. Somebody else can, take that spot or whatever, exactly what you were saying. But so that's my plug for Hero Haven. There's they also have a brewery that brews beer for them. I got one on the shelf up over there. They try to help people feel that they deserve to be on something like that as well. So I think they do hunts and fishing things. So another thing to think about, because you worked a long time, you served a long time, and it would be well deserved if you would participate in any of that kind of stuff. So don't be shy about that. There's my plug.
All right.
Now, and we can jump back to whatever as we go here, but these photos, and I'll put these back up on the screen again. Is there any other hobbies that you want to talk about before you did the memoir, retirement hobbies, anything else, or did it mostly swing towards this subject here?
Well, I did a couple of 2-week trips a year on the 17. So that was it just kind of weaned me from deployments in the Air Guard.
There you go.
So,
all right. So what was this group that you got involved in? How did it get started, and where did it take you?
It's the Experimental Aircraft Association in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And the way it kind of got started was a doctor bought the airplane. I mean, these airplanes have done everything. This airplane never saw combat.
Okay.
It kicked out at the end of World War II. It sold for $750, and it was full of fuel, and they hold 1,700 gallons.
Really? Holy cow.
And it was first, the guy bought it, was using it for some kind of a transport. Of course, they demilled it and beefed up the floor in it. And it had been a firefighting aircraft, but it spent most of its career as a photo mapping airplane in the middle and far east. Like about 12 years it was over there.
Yeah.
And so a pretty stable platform for, airborne pictures. So, and it went through a couple different owners after that. And finally, the guy that bought it, they decided they were going to try and fly it around the world. They tried to figure out the logistics, what it would take. And
oh, man.
No, so they donated it to the Experimental Aircraft Association.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's people say, well, what's experimental about a B-17? Well, it's not, but it's the organization that owns it.
Mm-hmm. So what capacity, how did you get involved in it? And
well,
what did you,
I don't know if you remember Jerry Johnson at all, Kim Johnson Hansen's dad.
I know of him. I never met him.
He was a technician crew chief on the A-7s, and he transferred to Tulsa. And he ended up taking an early retirement, worked for an airline down there, and he ended up back over in Spencer, Iowa at a small airport. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys he was working with over there was on this program. And he got Jerry on, and Jerry did it for a couple of years, and they were looking for some more guys. And you have to have an airframe and power plant mechanic license to do this. So I went over to a 3-day school over at Oshkosh, and I'm a B-17 mechanic,
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So the main thing was you guys ended up being crew chiefs, and the point was to go around to different air shows, or was there more mission than that?
No, they, I think at one time they were shooting for 60 cities in the season, which would start early spring into the end of October. And the only time the airplane would go home is for a major inspection. Mm-hmm. So it would bounce around. First trip I went on was in Southern California. Jerry and I picked it up at Van Nuys. We bounced around out there for a couple of weeks and came home again 2 mechanics came in. The pilots might stay for more than 2 weeks, but usually the mechanics just stayed for 2 weeks.
Well, I know with like the air shows here, they'll have airplanes coming in just a day or so ahead of time, and they kind of want to clear them out quickly after that. So did you guys have a network of places where if you had to leave an air show, I mean, they wouldn't want you to stay parked there to go somewhere else and park?
We normally didn't do air shows.
Oh, you didn't do air shows?
Because that restricts what you can fly.
Oh.
And that's what keeps the money flowing, revenue flights.
Okay.
We went to a number of smaller airports where they might have been having a celebration or something, but it never kept us from being able to sell rides and fly.
Oh, okay. I was misunderstanding. I didn't know it was revenue flights, but that makes a lot of sense.
Well, it's pretty spendy to operate.
Yeah.
We used to, when I was doing it, I think we got $425 a seat, and we could haul 10.
10.
That bought you 24 minutes of flying time.
Wheels up, 24 minutes.
Yeah.
Did that start as when the wheels were an inch off the ground and then an inch there, or did they let you get to altitude and get 24
Well,
minutes?
the way it worked, for instance, if I had the first flight, we'd go out, get the airplane ready to go, and we'd get a manifest from our tour coordinators, and when we were ready to go, get the people out there, give them a safety briefing, show them where they're going to strap in, how they're going to strap in, tell them what's going to go on in the flight. And so the first ones got to be on there longer by the time you warmed the engines up, did all your mag checks and all that sort of thing. So,
right.
But so we'd go fly once we were airborne wide, then my job became tour coordinator on the airplane to try to get 10 people all around that airplane in that short period of time.
Right.
Because some of them would want to go perch down the bombardier navigator area, and they'd try and jam up on the flight deck. And the better briefing you gave them before you took off, the easier it was. I learned that through the
Oh, yeah. Organization.
Yeah. And so you'd keep them up as long as you could, get them all seated, strapped in for landing, and I was back up between the pilots on landing. And we'd come in and we'd, if we had multiple flights, we'd shut down the engines on the right side. I'd offload my people. My buddy, the other mechanic I'm with, he loads his people on, gets them strapped in. I go fire guard them, and they go fly for 24 minutes.
Yeah.
And by that time, my next group may have showed up. I give them safety briefing, get them on there, and we do the same thing. I think the most I was ever, 4 times in a day was the most I ever flew.
Yeah. That's plenty, though.
Which was plenty, especially if it was warm.
Yeah.
Because you're having to move around a lot trying to get people to do what you want them to do.
No AC in that baby.
Well, you had a couple little doors you could open up the front of that radome, and then you could take the radio room hatch out, which is a big hole there, and so you got some flow through, but that's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Did you have trouble with people getting sick on it?
I only ever had one guy get sick.
That's impressive.
And of course, we weren't doing it. We're taking off and we're flying fairly low. They want to fly over my house kind of a thing. We're just cruising around. We were over in Des Moines, Iowa one time, and we're getting into some wind shear, and we're talking, we're not going to fly anymore. This is it.
Right. And
so I had everybody back, sat down. We're coming in to land, and about the time the wheels touched down, this guy came up through the bomb bay, is pounding me on the back. I'd offered him air sickness bags before we took off. Now he wanted one.
Yeah, too proud to take it at first.
So I'm back through the bomb bay again, and I got the bag open, and he threw up in it. And I said, there you go. The Air Force rules are, you got it.
Exactly. Oh, my worst. That could have been so bad.
It really could have. But he hit the bag, and but he walked around there most of the afternoon. He was so ashamed of the fact that he gets sick.
Right.
But it was getting rough. We weren't going to do another flight. You don't want to get people sick.
Yeah. Well, when it's warm,
yeah,
and you're inside a tube,
yeah,
and you feel stuff, but you can't see stuff,
yeah,
oh, that messes with you.
Yeah. So that's the only one I flew 150 times, and only ever saw one person get sick.
So how many years did you end up doing this?
I think it was right at 6 years.
6 years. And was it a Was it a 12-month gig and you would rotate off, or was there certain months?
Well, we didn't. It was spring to fall,
Okay.
the tour schedule. So, you'd go on for 2 weeks at a time. The next crew would come in to relieve you, and it just kept bouncing around.
You were gone a lot then.
Well,
that stepping you down from deployments, that's a lot.
I was out for 3 weeks one time, and that was too long
Yeah.
because you fly every day, and you're busy.
Mm-hmm.
You hope the airplane holds together and don't have to do too much maintenance on it, because
Right.
if they got flights sold for the next day, they'd like to have you get it fixed at night.
Right. And that reminds me, because just the other day you approached me about going ahead and doing one of these, and we talked about some landing gear problems. So what kind of problems did you ever have to overcome with this?
Well, I only ever had to crank the landing gear down one time.
Mm-hmm.
But the landing gear are run by an electric motor about the size of a football, and they weren't designed to be up and down in 24 minutes.
Right.
And they'd heat up. Finally, they were using the mil spec called for on the jack screws on the gear, and they discovered there was a lot better one out there, and to lube them, and that helped too.
Mm-hmm.
But we even did fly a couple times, flew gear down while we were giving tours, just
to leave
because. Yeah.
Not want to take the chance.
Yeah, and I think that pretty well fixed it, the new lube thing. But
So you had to hand crank them down once?
one
How many?
year.
I think I asked you how many revolutions you need to go with
It
that.
seems like a lot, but I think it's upwards to 300, 270 some, I think. But the particular time I had to do it, both of us were on the airplane. We were going back into Oshkosh because we'd had a position indicating problem, and we wanted to get back where we get some jacks.
Mm-hmm.
And because they were indicating being down and locked all the time when they were up even. Not good.
No.
There's only one indicator for the three. But
Was there a way to visually check no matter what the lights were saying? So you could confirm.
That was one of the things that, for me, once we're going to land, I'm visually watching. Maybe there's a line painted there. You could tell they're down and locked or not.
Okay, and locked, not just down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I used to watch them too. You could watch the linkage that runs from the crank is back into the flight deck. And once we put the gear switch down, I'd watch and make sure, see how they were running.
Mm-hmm.
Supposed to be down in a certain length of time. But anyway, got her cranked down, and we went to the motel. The full-time guys there at Oshkosh fixed the airplane, and we came out and took it the next morning and left. So
All is well.
yeah, all was well.
Take off sequel endings.
Yep.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Here's something that I ask people from the maybe more on the personal side of the house, from your highest highs in your life and your lowest lows, all encompassing. What's something you've learned from that?
Well, one thing my dad told me that I never believed was the older you get, the faster time goes.
Mm-hmm.
You may have recognized that yourself.
Yes, I have, especially those soft starts.
I'm luckily enough, I guess I can't say I have some real
Mm-hmm.
real lows.
Yep. There's just things that we all go through, and you learn from them and learn to cope. But you hope the scale is
Right.
on the good times versus the others. What's made you most proud about wearing your uniform?
Well, I never thought I would ever make chief. A lot of other people didn't either.
Oh, come on.
I used to go around with Arnie Jansen. Of course, you knew Arnie,
Mm-hmm.
chief in munitions, was always bragging about being a chief. I said, Arnie, I was a chief when I was 18, a crew chief.
Yep.
Of course, I got a few swear words out of him on that.
Oh,
but
yeah, I'm sure.
no, I pretty well lucked out. Right place at the right time kind of a thing,
Yep. Yeah. You just had just a great career. Outside looking in, I was in operations, you were in maintenance. And I just remember when I started going to the chiefs meetings and stuff, being honest, whether in those meetings or just out and about, you were one of the people that I watched the most on how you handled things. And I describe Tom Campbell the same way, just calm, cool, and collected, logical, and just was a model to watch is the way I'll put it. And I'm not blowing smoke or anything, but you were one of the most that I watched just to try to silently mentor myself without telling you about it till now.
Fortunately, we had a lot of good people out there. There were
Ton of them.
Very cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when that last job I had, it helped. You know, he'd been around a long time, been on a lot of deployments.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just
seen a lot of things and learned how to act and react is the way I saw it.
Mostly had good supervisors. You know, I had one or two that probably, in my mind, said, "I'm not ever going to do it that way."
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's a few people been on here been talking about supervisors. You learn the good and the bad from different supervisors and what to do and what not to do in your interpretation, and hope that you reach to that point where you can put that into operation. So is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you can think of?
I was looking at that airplane there again. That's the second B-17 I was on. The first one actually kicked out at the end of World War II, and it went to the Far East to be a VIP airplane.
Really?
And Eisenhower and MacArthur both flew on that airplane.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So that was only on that 1 year, and that's while this one was in repair for an issue they had with it. So, But it was just kind of cool to both this one and the other airplane fly with the colors of the unit markings of two that got shot down in World War II. So they're just representative of those.
I was going to ask you about the paint scheme, because of this here, if they modeled it after anything or time period or anything like that.
They would fly with the squadron and group lettering on the tail and that I think this one got shot down in the one it's painted like was shot down in France. I think the other one might have been France as well, but.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. I remember when I'd see you at, say, after you retired, I was still there, Christmas parties or retirements, I'd usually ask you about how's the flying going and stuff, because I had heard from one of the other crew chiefs that you had gotten into this, and I didn't know much about it, but it just seemed like you're having a pretty good time.
Yeah, most of the time I really enjoyed it. One of the things I enjoyed most, I was on it long enough ago, there were still World War II types that flew it. And they'd always try and round some of them up at our tour stops and have them come out, and they'd be talking to people and
Right.
fun if they rode with you.
Yeah.
I think I might have told you about one old boy we had actually got flying the airplane.
I think you did.
We were at, I got a picture of him hanging up in my bar, me and the other mechanic. We were in Cincinnati, Ohio, and him and his son flew with us on a revenue flight. So they paid for a flight, and then he wanted a picture of me and the other mechanic in front of their ops there. He was just a happy little fellow.
Yeah.
He could still wear his flight jacket that he had,
Yeah.
But the next day, we were going to somewhere in Kentucky. I think we were going to Lexington. And if you'd already bought a ride and you wanted to ride to the next location, you got a freebie. You just had to find your own way back. And we had found out that day was going to be his 90th birthday.
Yep, I do remember.
Yeah. And I had him up on the flight deck, and once we got airborne, the left seater got up and said, "There you go."
Yeah.
Sat him in the seat.
Yep.
And it's a relatively short flight we were on, but he sat there quite a while. I mean, he was his grin couldn't have got any wider. On his 90th birthday, he's flying a B-17.
That is cool.
Yeah.
That is cool.
So you got to meet a lot of people like that,
Well, and that's what got me going on the DAV story. I just finally remembered on how I got off on that tangent is that the Vietnam Vet Day that they had just a few weeks ago, there was a 99-year-old World War II person there. And he left before I found out just minutes before he left, and I didn't get a chance to go talk to him or not. But yeah, so there's just a few of those World War II guys left, but very few.
Yeah.
They're definitely upper 90s. And my neighbor across the section here, a guy I go to church with, his dad was part of the VFW in Hudson down here, and he flew on one of those. And on that wall over there, before I rearranged it, there was a shadow box with cowboy hat, cowboy boots, and a couple pieces of, I think there's a couple pieces of military stuff in there that his son had donated for in here. But then when his dad passed away, I took it and gave it back to him. And
That's
he
cool.
was appreciative of that. But Hobie was instrumental with his operations and his part in the war with B-17, which was pretty cool. I don't remember what position. He wasn't flying it, I don't think. But
One kind of a cool thing that happened on one of our trips, most of our pilots had been military and were a retired airline. So, but we had a few kind of oddballs. One was a retired Air Force Senior Master Sergeant, one of the pilots.
yeah.
And he had type ratings in all kinds of different airplanes. And he was really a good pilot, kind of a character. But we were going from somewhere in Iowa to St. Joe, Missouri. And we were starting to let down, and we went over a rural cemetery, and we could see that there was an honor guard set up out there.
Uh-huh.
And you could see the hearse coming down the road. And the other crew chief was sleeping in the back. It was my turn to be up front, and we just kind of all looked at each other and makes a big sweeping turn.
That is
Came
excellent.
around, there was kind of some low scud there. I don't remember what our altitude was, but we popped out pretty low, right over the top of this cemetery when things were happening. And up into the clouds again we went.
Wow.
So we
I
went
bet you there were some tears flowing on that.
I was
deal.
hoping nobody had a heart attack. I mean,
Yeah.
really. But we were in St. Joe we moved every Monday and Thursday.
Uh-huh.
And so nobody down there said anything about it. And we went to Lee's Summit, a small suburb airport in Kansas City next. And guy came up to me there and he said, you weren't the guys that made that low pass over the cemetery. I said, well, guilty. How many B-17s you see around here?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But he said that the guy wasn't a World War II vet, but he had been a Korean War vet, the deceased. And of course, the family was all in shock. Like, what's that about? Kind of.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, any vet, even nowadays, man, what an honor to have a B-17 fly over at your funeral and have your family and friends see it.
I don't know what our altitude was. I was kind of looking at the engine instruments. We were pretty low.
Yeah, well, good on you. That's all I have to say.
That was one of the more fun things.
Wow. I'm glad we got to that story.
And that senior that he's passed now, but he used to do the maintenance on the thing too and fly it besides.
Uh-huh.
And so whenever you were working on it, well, he'd come around and look at you like, you making a career out of that or what? Because he could have done it a lot faster. But
one of what they call the good old boys, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he was quite a guy.
Man alive. Oh.
Yeah, I had my wife finally said, you got your 150 flights. You're probably getting to be too old to be flying around on an airplane that's older than you. And at that point, I kind of agreed as well. Had my fun.
Had your fun. Mm-hmm. Yep. Anything else coming to mind?
I probably talked enough.
Oh, this was a blast. I was hoping you would agree to it. I wasn't going to push you, but yeah, and ending with this and that story in particular, that's pretty sweet. Pretty sweet. Now, I think I know the answer, but did you have any children?
No.
Okay. Got
Got married late in life, and my wife couldn't have kids, so we got a lot of nieces and nephews, and had some dogs, and
yeah. Okay. Well, the question that I end with quite often, we will steer that down to your nieces, nephews, and their future families and kids and great grandkids, who knows, maybe have a chance to see this sometime. So let's just say there are about 40 of their great grandkids still tied to you and your family sitting under that center camera. What would you like to say to them?
I don't know. They pretty well know old Uncle Buck, so.
Uncle Buck, yeah. Not the one on the movie.
No, but I have taken some, I think old Danny Clausen comes out to some of those safety meetings, and he calls me Uncle Buck.
Does he? Yeah. And like I said, that's why I like doing this for your friends and your family. It's not for popularity on YouTube or anything like that. I just like people being able to pass on their story and people being able to see it. And
that's kind of why I started doing the memoir thing.
Yes.
I thought, well, if I ever get Alzheimer's, maybe I'll be able to see what I used to do.
There you go. Good way to put it. Yeah, and that's I'm big on having pictures and things too, digital. So I've told people before that if I end up in the nursing home where all I can do is do a mouse click by blinking my eyes, I can just look at all the pictures of what used to be.
Yeah. There you go.
You bet. Well, thanks again for doing this. I greatly appreciate it.
You bet.
You bet.
It's been fun.
You bet. And thank you for your service, and in particular, your Vietnam service as well. So.
All right.
All right. Cool. Thanks for watching. There it is.
Now I might take you up on one of them cool ones.
Absolutely.